In this lesson, we're going to talk about proportions, but I do want to begin this lesson by talking about what the word ratio means. A ratio is a comparison of two numbers by the operation division. And there are three ways to represent a ratio, and they are the three examples that are given here. We have 7 with a colon 4, and then 7/4 as a fraction, and then 7/2 with the word 2, 4. So 7 to 4 is just those three different ways ratios are represented. And a big thing to remember about ratios is that they always have to be simplified. For example, if you had the ratio 8 to 4, that would be an unsimplified ratio. You'd always want to simplify that down to 2 to 1. So looking at just ratios in general, we want to just kind of look at these three examples and just ask ourselves, let's simplify them. So here, we would have our first ratio would be 1 to 4. We would also have 1 over 4 as a fraction. And it looks like the next one would be 1 to 3. 1 to 3, because 15 goes into 45 3 times. So that would be how you simplify your ratio. Okay, now working with ratios, we also have this word proportion. And a proportion is a statement of equality between two ratios. And we want to figure out, is one ratio equal to the other ratio? And that forms a proportion. So looking at these two examples here, we have 4 over 11 equals 12 over 33. And the way that you can determine if these two ratios form a proportion is doing this thing where we multiply the cross products. So as seen here with the red circles, if I take 11 and multiply it by 12, I get 132. And if I take 4 and multiply it by 33, I get 132. And because those cross products are equal to each other, the two ratios are proportional, meaning both of them will simplify down and equal the same number. So they're both equal to each other. Okay, let's look at the next one. Let's look at 16 over 17 equals 8 over 9. So if we use our cross products, let's do 16 times 9. And 16 times 9 is going to give us 144. And then if we multiply our 17 times our 8, that's going to give us 136. You can see our two numbers are completely different from each other. So these two ratios do not form a proportion. Now, when we solve proportions, we're going to use those cross product things that we were just doing. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to, you don't actually have to do this, but I'm just kind of showing you visually. This is what we're going to be doing. Now, I'm going to show you two ways to solve a proportion. First of all, I'm going to show you mathematically. So when we do this, we're going to multiply these two cross products. So I'm going to have 5x is equal to 6 times 15. And that's essentially what I'm doing. I'm multiplying them whenever I'm doing the cross products. If I simplify this equation down, which is why we're talking about a proportion in the equations unit, I'm going to get 5x equals 90. And I'm going to go ahead and if I divide that by 5, I'm going to get x is equal to 18. Now, that is how I solve my proportion. That is my answer. Now, I always like to check my proportion, and here's how I do it. I actually, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to erase my little ovals here and just kind of talk through this. So I always like to check myself with the proportion by stating this. I locate where my x variable is, and then I just notice who his two next door neighbors are. And if I take those two numbers and multiply them, so multiply 6 times 15, I'm going to get the number 90. And once I get that number, I'm going to divide it by my last number that I have, divided by 5, and that's going to give me my final answer. So it's kind of a cool little trick with proportions, but basically what you're doing is you're doing the math mentally. So let's do another one. I'm going to show you the math, and then we'll do it using the trick. So the math has us doing our cross products. So I have 4 times A equals 13 times 8. Now, 13 times 8 is going to give us 104. So 4A is equal to 104. And then I'm going to go ahead and divide both sides by 4. So when I do that, I'm going to get A is equal to 26. So what that's saying is that A right there, the number that you're going to plug in there is 26. That's the only number that will make those two ratios equal and will make this a whole proportion. Now, just kind of going back to that little trick I showed you, here's the trick again. I always locate my variable, and then I locate his two adjacent neighbors, which are 13 and 8. And I multiply those two numbers together. And when I do that, it gives me 104. I'm going to take that and I'm going to divide it by the last number that's available, and I'm going to get my final answer, which is A. So kind of a cool little trick to use. Now, let's look at some more upper level proportion types of problems. So now that we know the basics of proportions, we can actually use what we know to solve these bigger proportion problems. Again, we're always working with the cross products. So I'm just going to circle my cross products. You don't have to circle them. I'm just kind of showing you visually what we're doing here. And I'm going to multiply them together. So I'm going to say 2 times 2x is equal to 6 times x plus 7. Notice how I put x plus 7 in parentheses because x plus 7 is a quantity. Well, now I have a multi-step equation. So let's go ahead and solve it. Once I distribute my numbers, I can now work with my two-step equation here. I'm going to move my variables off to the left-hand side just to make everything easier. And my last step is just going to be to divide both sides by 2. I'm sorry, negative 2, which is going to give me x equals negative 28. So in this equation, this negative 28, I can replace right here and right here. And that would make that right-hand side equal to the left-hand side of 6 over 2. So it's you really got to be careful. You don't want to just try to sit and figure out what could x be to make the two ratios equal to each other. There's always a systematic way of doing these types of problems. Let's go ahead and do another one. Again, I always begin with my cross products, and I'm going to multiply numbers that are across from each other. So it doesn't matter which two things that I write down first, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to write 4 times b minus 8 is equal to 5 times b plus 3. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to solve by distributing. All right, excellent. Now I have multi-step equations with variables on both sides, and so now I want to move some things around. So this time, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start with the constants. I'm going to move my negative 32. I'm going to move him over to the other side, just because I've always been moving the variables first, and I wanted to kind of show you a different way of doing it. So you'll notice that I still have my b's on both sides, but now I'm going to have plus 7, I'm sorry. Let me erase that real quick. There we go. Excellent. Okay, now let's move my variables. I'm going to go ahead and move 5b over to the left-hand side. Oh, I love these types of problems because take a look. I'm left with negative b equals 47, and unfortunately, the b is not by itself yet. Remember, there's always a 1 in front of the b, and so when I have a negative out there, I actually have a negative 1, and I have to get rid of the negative. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to divide both sides by negative 1. The reason is, right now, negative 1 is being multiplied by b, so I want to do that opposite operation. And that will give me a final answer of b equals negative 47. Now, the cool thing about proportions is they're equations, so you can actually do a check step for this as well. You can do exactly like we've been doing in the other sections and substitute negative 47 back into your variables to make sure that you did it properly. sometimes you're given word problems, and you need to create a proportion and figure out, the application, the answer to the application problem. So let's look at this one. So Mrs. DeBalda's iPod has 2 gigs of storage and can hold about 500 songs. A similar but larger media player at Costco has 8 gigs of storage. About how many songs can the larger media player hold? So you might be thinking, like, maybe I'll just multiply these numbers, but I kind of wanted to show you how to set up a proportion to solve this. So when I set up a proportion, I always think, okay, what 2 things am I comparing? What 2 things is the application problem talking about? In our case, we're talking about gigs of storage over the numbers of, the number of songs that we can have. And then I'm thinking to myself, well, what numbers am I given? Well, it says that my iPod has 2 gigs of storage, right? So 2 gigs. And I actually don't need to write that G there. And I'm actually going to take it away just so it's not too confusing. I got too many things going on here at once. There we go. Okay, so I have 2 gigs of storage. And 2 gigs of storage holds about 500 songs on average. And I want to know, all right, there's an 8 gig media player at Costco. So I'm going to set this equal to another ratio. And I know that I have 8 gigs, and the gigs is on the top in the numerator. And I want to know, well, how many songs does it have? So there is my proportion. So I can go ahead and I can find my cross products, and I can set up my problem as such. And it looks like I have 2x is equal to 4,000. And I'm just going to go ahead and divide by 2. And my x is going to be 2,000. So to answer my question, I always like to use my little therefore symbol. Therefore, the 8 gig storage device will hold about 2,000 songs. So that's just kind of like showing you the application of a proportion where you might see it. All right, that is the end of our proportion section.